A mission would mean a full-time look at skilling and upskilling and learning, uplearning, unlearning of public servants to deliver the best to its citizens. And lifelong learning has to be an embedded part of the public servant while he is delivering services.
Hello and welcome to the Coursera podcast, where we have conversations with renowned experts and industry leaders to explore the global trends that are impacting the future of education and work. I'm your host, Anthony Salcido, President and General Manager of Enterprise at Coursera, and thank you very much for joining. Around the world, governments are asking a very, very hard question. How do you prepare public servants for new demands from citizens, new technologies, and new ways of working? For companies, workforce transformation is difficult for sure. For governments, the scale is even bigger, and a single learning system may need to reach senior leaders, frontline workers, technical teams, and people serving citizens every day. Now, this is big on scale, but India is big in general, and they're taking on this challenge through Mission Karmayogi. This is a national capacity building effort, really the largest in the world. And this is an effort for civil servants and government officials to help build skills that closely tie to the roles that they perform and then the roles that, frankly, their citizens rely on. Today, we're going to talk about how India is building a learning culture. The foundation of Mission Karmayogi is vast, but that culture component is going to resonate. And that certainly is something that is really gold to reach millions of public servants. And think about how skills in areas like AI, data, leadership, and digital government are becoming part of the future of public service. And certainly, this is an important topic. This is something that is resonating with governments that I talk to all around the world. And Mission Karmayogi is an example of how it can be done and really commitment of leaders. And I'm joined by one of those today. Our guest is Ms. Radha Chauhan, chairperson of India's capacity building program. Ms. Chauhan is a civil servant with more than 36 years of leadership across public policy, institutional reform, fiscal governance, and digital transformation. She has held roles across the government of India, the government of Uttar Pradesh, as well as throughout her career has led major digital governance initiatives, including work in Digital India, government e-marketplace, and capacity building for civil servants. Today, in her role as chairperson of the Capacity Building Commission, she is helping steer the national vision for strengthening the public sector workforce under Mission Karmayogi. It's my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Chauhan to the podcast. Radha, welcome, and thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here.
This is an important conversation, so I'm excited to have your vision and your thoughts. I guess let's start with the big picture. So Mission Karmayogi, as I said, is one of the largest public sector capacity building efforts in the entire world. And what was the need that you saw to start this such an important mission? What was the thing that sort of compelled you and India to put efforts behind Mission Karmayogi?
This mission, Karmayogi, is about 5 years old. And it started with, I think, any major initiative of this scale needs for it to have a political vision, political ownership, and political leadership's clarity of what is the purpose of such a mission and what should its outcome be. So the mission and the vision statement, when we started it 5 years back, by the Honorable Prime Minister at that time, who personally was involved in crafting this whole mission and the whole design of what it aims to achieve. It says two key words, which I think sort of explains the whole intent behind the need for such a mission. It talks about future ready civil servants and it talks about governance that is citizen centric. So I think the spirit of future ready civil servants should be seen as a multi-layered, very deep resonance with how citizen centric the public servants of any government system should be. When we say future ready, tomorrow is future for any public servant serving today. And you have that kind of a dynamic way of acquiring competencies in a changing ecosystem of governance, whether it's driven by technology, it's driven by citizens' aspirations. I think all of those ecosystem stakeholders define the dynamicity in which the civil servants perform. So the future ready part of it emphasizes on the competency that has to be acquired on the go by any civil servant worth the name. And at the same time, I think the citizen centricity also brings into picture the aspirational citizen demands. I think the citizens, when I used to be a public servant who had just 10 years in experience, it was more a favor that the government gave, and the citizens were okay with partaking of the benefits that were given to them. But now, when you have a very aggressive, aspirational, totally connected citizenry, which is benchmarking not only the global levels of service given by any other governments across the world, it's also benchmarking the services of the public governance systems with the private sector. So, for example, the hotels, the experience of an elite hotel for the citizen and going to a hospital, a private corporate hospital, they are almost similar today. The citizens going to a government hospital today goes with the expectation that that's the same kind of service that he's going to take in. And he's not going to be giving us that kind of a leeway to think, okay, what about the funds? What about the subsidized rates at which government serves? None of that matters. Regardless of the constraints in which public service operates, the citizens' demand is at par with benchmarking the public services to the corporates, to the best in the market, best in the world. I think those are the two challenges which bring to focus the need for a mission. A mission would mean a full time look at skilling and upskilling and learning, uplearning, unlearning of public servants to deliver the best to its citizens.
Yeah, I think rising expectations for government services is something that government leaders like yourself are dealing with from citizens consistently. I love the focus on sort of building a long term shift that the mission drives. But one of the things that I'm curious about, can you help us define one of the tenets of Mission Karmayogi, which is moving from a rule based model to more of a role-based model for public administration? I'd love to understand exactly what that is. What's the definition behind it?
Prior to the mission coming into existence, the training institutions structurally were designed to equip and train particular sets of services which were rule based in the sense of if you were an income tax officer, if you were a police officer, you would be trained by the police academy. You would be trained by the income tax academy. You would be trained by the revenue academy, which were very specific to the sector, to the recruitments that were done based on very specific roles that you would assay. So it would assume, that system assumed that once a police officer came into the system of public governance, he is constantly going to be a police officer and he is going to retire as a police officer. That's your rule based progression of a public servant in typical Indian public services. When you move it to a role based training or capacity building, you're looking at the fungibility and flexibility of public servant moving from a regulatory role to a function which can be totally a developmental role. So you have today, for example, actual examples of police officers trained to be regulators and for policing and law and order, actually driving some of the digital transformational projects. Now, when they shift in these roles, there is a rule that is giving way to a role based assignment. So, that role would require beyond the rule based training institutional capacity building to a functionally aligned competency building. So, the whole mission Karmayogi is one of the underpinnings is from a typical episodic training based on the rule based recruitment of an officer to multiple career progression pathways that are opening up based on the skills he acquires. So it gives a lot of aspirational avenues for the public servants themselves to change track based on things that they have picked up, based on experiences they have gained. So a health expert can tomorrow pitch into an educational system where he is looking at early care of small children. Now, when you move from a rule based to a role based deployment of officers in the public sector systems, you are looking at a role based equipping them with the competencies and capacities that are required. I think that is the spirit behind the whole rule to role based, which also means a humongous amount of transformation of the training institutions today because they are all structurally designed to impart trainings that are rule oriented. So an income tax academy will only be doing what they were supposed to do. So we are transforming more than 800 odd institutions in the country as part of the mission to shift from a rule to a role based training, which again is a very, very significant shift that formally these structures organizationally would have to move into.
It's an important shift, and it parallels, frankly, what at Coursera we see from organizations that we deal with across the world that are trying to move from sort of job based focus to skill based focus. And it really underscores the need for constant reskilling and sort of a lifelong learning commitment that's built into the culture of the workplace, where employees are adapting and growing as the technology and the foundation of the work changes. To do that, frankly, the thing that you need to underpin is building a culture for learning. And this is a hard thing for many organizations to pivot towards. But I know this is an area that you've been focused on in Mission Karma Yogi. So I'm curious, how have you started to build that culture of learning across your large system in India?
That's a big challenge for the whole mission. And specifically, when you look at public servants who are anyway burdened with the routine job, and almost many of them would see a mandated learning, mandated acquisition of competencies, or something that is being forced down upon them. So, this behavioral nudge that we had to bring in, which made it more voluntary, needed a lot of hooks and stickiness in the way we went about designing these courses, designing the whole lifelong learning as a concept that gets embedded in the organizations. I think the individual culture of lifelong learning also means that the organizational adaptiveness to push it from there also, the demand of the organizations that the upskilling and the lifelong learning as a pattern of habitual behavior is imbibed as the ethos of the organization. That happens organically. I think we attacked the challenge from both the sides. One was organically nudging people behaviorally, incentivizing people who were learning, acknowledging people who were learning, rewarding people who were doing very well on the platform on which we were delivering these courses, and connecting it to their performance assessment in the government system. Now, that's a system in which your performance is assessed. If these learnings are contributing to enhanced performance, then there is an incentive already built into the system. So, it was both a nudge by way of incentivizing and behavioral nudge. I think the incentivizing is not longer lasting, and therefore, the behavioral nudge of ensuring that you imbibe this ever being curious, having the appetite to learn and deliver better performances. I think for all of that, this reiterative process of the successful mentors talking to their teams and bringing this as a value, it's a work in process, but progress. But we think we have significantly addressed the challenge pretty well.
I love the consistency of the integration across building this learning culture. So the recognition is certainly clear. Incentives help, but you're right, they're not needed in a true learning culture that you establish long term. And building it into performance assessment and tying back on how learning is contributing to how you show up every day is absolutely foundational. So I think that's the thing that you need to do and just keep at it with consistency and, frankly, authenticity that is top down across an organization. And that's certainly the foundation that you've put in place in Karma Yogi. So that's great to see. I'm curious how it ties to the broader, longer term vision in India. I know Viksit Bharat, which is essentially the name for a developed India by 2047, is a foundational goal across India. And I'm curious and certainly see a natural tie in to the national vision for change and Mission Karma Yogi. But can you share a little bit how intentional the connection between your plans for developing India for the future and the foundation you're putting in place with Mission Karma Yogi is, and how you see that impact connected?
The Viksit Bharat is certainly a very aspirational, tangible targets that the nation through its ministries and departments and organizations have come out with. And these have come out over a period of, I think, almost 2 years, where from the grassroots level, the national priorities were defined. What should be the national priority? What should Viksit Bharat is developed India? What do you think a developed India should be like? So every sector, every ministry, every department, every organization within the governments, and not it's a India being a federated political system, more than 36 units of states and union territories, a huge consultative process through which the definition of the outcomes that define Viksit Bharat, a developed India, should have these sets of outcomes. They are very clearly, in detail, tangible outputs and outcomes that have been defined. So that makes the job of Mission Karmayogi that much easier, because you have very clearly defined outcomes by way of performance that the governance systems have to deliver. Therefore, to retrofit it into the learning skills that are needed, the learning courses that need to, the competencies that need to be built, competencies keeping in view the technology dynamically evolving over a period of time, and also the pace at which the technology is pushing a lot of change in the ecosystem. The Viksit Bharat looks at the national priorities very clearly being understood by the frontline worker down at the community level to the strategic leadership at the, say, the national government level. All of them share the same vision, same understanding of Viksit Bharat. I think that is a big challenge we have been able to cover. Otherwise, the national priorities are never interpreted the same way. There are always various different levels of defining what is a national priority. But having a national priority so clearly defined at this time, and to have a roadmap which is clearly up there till 2047 with milestones that are set for 100 days, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, makes the capacity building so much sharper and focused on building those competencies. So I think they come together so well, which is why today, when you look at the mission numbers that we have been able to deliver, it's all because from the grassroots level up to the strategic political policy leadership level, we have been able to align the skilling and the capacity building very clearly.
I think certainly what I love to see as you describe the connection with the long term future vision is a recognition that this is essential work. It's not an option to build up skills through Karma Yogi. It absolutely fills into the national plan. Sometimes we often think about skilling as an afterthought, but with your mission so far in the future, preparing citizens and the workforce for building that future is not an optional component, but an essential one. And that's something that I think we're seeing at a small level and large level across governments and industry all across ERA, where oftentimes technology or business results tend to be the priority. And what ends up happening is many organizations come to realize that in preparing their talent and their people is the foundation for their growth and success. And that's certainly something that you're doing at a large scale, which is something I want to shift to, and talking about how do you do this to the scale you're enabling. And let's talk a little bit about the platform. So you're reaching 15 million civil servants with a platform designed for learning. Can you tell me a little bit more about the platform and how you're going about that scale?
Yeah, we have 16 million as we speak, 16 million plus on the platform, and we have a target of 30 million plus that needs to come on board this platform. So it's an end to end platform where we have the capacity building plans for every role and function that happens in the government, across ministries, across every organization, institution, from the frontline, grassroots level, community worker, up to the strategic leadership level. Every role and function of, say, a health department to a coal ministry to an education ministry to a science and technology ministry sector. So we have all the sectors, all the ministries across the hierarchies mapped. This also includes the rural panchayats, which are the local community level governance systems. Then you have the urban local bodies, which are again democratic organizations where you have elected representatives manning the local governance. So the scale of it is that it pans across the provinces, pans across the national government. It also includes the public sector organizations. So if you put all of them together, the flavor, the numbers, the scale, and the range at which the courses are being provided would look like a challenge, but now that we have been able to develop an AI based tool for creating these capacity building plans, so we are starting at a place where empirically evidence based competencies are mapped, and then the competency gaps then are enabled for us to identify the courses that creates the demand for the marketplace like Coursera and others to develop content for us. So we have a very evidence based demand generation of competency gaps based courses that needs to come in place, and therefore we know for each individual there's an hyper personalization as we speak happening on this iGOT platform, where I, with my personal profile, professional profile, educational background, experience, all of it put together, the courses are personalized to my current role and functionality. Based on my previous experiences, what are the competencies that I would have? Therefore, I think the experience on the platform has become more sharper, refined, and personalized, which makes the whole acquisition of competency a pleasure to. I must say, maybe I'm sounding a little boastful, but this work has been done. And the AI tool, which we think has been sort of expedited the whole efficiency of preparing capacity building plans and keeping them dynamic, because tomorrow a new scheme, a new program, or a new agentic AI coming into place, it will be able to on real time change the plan, amend the plans. Therefore the demand for the courses, therefore the demand of gaps that need to be addressed are all being communicated on this plan. So it's an end to end platform where now we are integrating the training institutions also with their in campus courses. So you have an online system complemented and supplemented by an offline in campus course also to come together. Therefore, now we have a full 3 degree of capacity building for every public servant across the hierarchy. Theoretically, of course, and 16 million already being there gives us a huge data set to develop it more, make it much more relevant and sharp.
You have the data set for sure. I'd love to understand a little bit of learning, because what you mentioned with iGOT serving frontline workers and senior officials is certainly a core priority. Now, personalization is helping make it feel natural, but is there anything at the platform level that you've learned about serving distinct types of users in terms of their expectation, time for learning, place for learning, even devices for learning that you've had to integrate into the platform?
Yes, absolutely. The behavioral pattern of every learner, even at an individual level, is something that we track. But institutional level, a community based frontline worker has a very different way of learning. The local language matters. Contextualization matters very much when you talk about the citizen interfacing set of public servants. They have a different way of learning because it's less intellectual and it's more practical. Then you have an operational level of learning where it is on the go kind of an experience that they would like to have on the platform. Then you have a strategic level of leadership, which again has a very different behavioral pattern. These patterns are analyzed on the platform and the design is developed, and these are shared with our content creators, which is the market service providers. So a lot of demand generated also goes along with inputs on the content that should be developed for different hierarchies, different roles, and different functionalities. So the same set of competencies get delivered in different manner, and the contextualization for that matter is also decentralized. So it's not like there's a central national agency doing all of it together. The state agencies are permitted to work their own contextualized, dialect wise, bringing in a flavor that is different from the national flavor of learning. All of that is enabled on it's a democratized platform, and it's a democratized learning structure that we are developing. And to a great extent, I think the Sadhana Saptah, the National Learning Week that we had, it almost brought in about 70% of the frontline workers actually coming in and taking in an AI course, which we thought maybe AI course is something, a course on basics of how to use artificial intelligence. We never thought it would sort of get picked up. But when we saw it did, we have developed more number of courses in the local language.
You mentioned Sadhana Saptah, and I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about why did you decide to build out a National Learning Week, and what was the sort of the thinking behind it, and how do you integrate the themes to drive? And I'm sure this is something that is been a big feature of Mission Karmayogi, but could you tell us a little more about how it came to be and how it's been going?
Yes, so the Sadhana Saptah, the National Learning Week, is was seen as a kind of reaffirming our commitment to lifelong learning, reaffirming the centrality of capacity building as a non-negotiable part of Viksit Bharat, developed India, and a kind of reiteration by the political leadership also. So the Sadhana Saptah, again, we had our Honorable Prime Minister coming and reaffirming the priority of capacity building in achieving the national goals, because that again re-energizes, because as I said, the behavioral nudge has to be eternally there from the system, because the naturally curious learner is anyway going to learn whether you have a mission karmyogi or not. But it is those people who are into the routine work so much that they have to be taken out, and for a week at least, it's like rejuvenating them, giving them the space and time to think about it, come together as a nation, come together as a one big team that is working together, share experiences, share challenges. So the Sadhana Saptah was not just individual learning. We built in a lot of what we call samuhik charchas, a form of people coming together organically discussing what is it that they face as a challenge when we are looking at the mission karmyogi or anything that they think they should be talking about. So interestingly, a lot of frontline workers participated in these discussion forum, contributed to what their ideas about Viksit Bharat, developed India was, what learning should be, what is it that stops them from learning on the online. There are a lot of reservations people had from certain geographies. Should it be online? Should it not be offline that you could come? From the nitty gritty, granular challenges and viewpoints to the top level of understanding the whole stakeholder ecosystem was also a part of us doing this National Learning Week, so that we know, are we going the correct way? Are we going the right way? Are our learners, are the public servants looking at it still the way it should be? So it was both an realignment, reaffirmation, and re-energizing our resolve that this is the only way to go, and lifelong learning has to be an embedded part of the public servant while he is delivering services.
The connections that you've had here and sort of the week is just a good signal to the commitment and a way to get energy across citizens. So it's amazing to see. I want to shift a little bit to the what in terms of the focus on digital skills within a world of AI and cybersecurity, digital governance really shifting in terms of expectations. How are you thinking about sort of the next set of skills within these technologies and priority areas as you shape the future of the government in India?
Major part of our conversation now is looking at how the artificial intelligence, which is the technology drive that's happening, how does it impact capacity building as a whole? How does agents coming into being, the way they are envisaged, and they are being talked about, researchers suggesting that the technology is the easiest part. It is the capacity of organizations to adapt to the technologies being used there. So we are looking at, while I'm giving a lot of skills and competencies, say relating to artificial intelligence and the tools that are there, we are also looking at the issues of shadow AIs in the governance ecosystem. We are also looking at the illusion of enablement. Now, we have enabled the individual learners to use tools of AIs and agents of AIs. Are the organizations in which they are going to be part of, where they are going to be actually using these skills, are those organizations adapted to letting these skills being utilized? So we are looking at institutional capacity building, organizational capacity building that could fully utilize the skills that individual learners, individual public servants are picking up from the whole mission. and its purpose, whether it is iGOT competencies or it is training institutions imparting. We are moving slowly our focus also to the institutional and the organizational capacity building. At the same time, we are also looking at the non AI part of, I think, the behavioral aspect of public servants will be a constant challenge where we need to be very dynamic in understanding the challenges in which the public servants would be operating, what kind of leadership potentials and skills, what kind of communication skills we need to provide them. For instance, handling social media is a great challenge, a big challenge with a lot of public servants, and it is increasingly becoming a demand. Now, that is something that we haven't done much of a work on, but I think the whole ecosystem in which public servants are delivering, since that workplace and the workspace and the work is getting redefined, we are preparing ourselves to be more aligned and attuned to forecasting what is going to be needed and be ready before time if possible, at least certainly on time, surely, to ensure those competencies are available so that we don't let down our public servants in delivering those services.
Super valuable, and certainly one of the things that I know Coursera has been involved in with the iGOT platform is not only delivering courses but credentials into the marketplace. And I'm curious, these are great obviously for a signal of demonstration of skills, but also valuable signals to employers. So I'm curious about the thinking on credentials, professional certificates, verified skills as part of the foundational thinking on Mission Karmayogi. Is how intentional has that been in the program?
The intent has always been there. I think the challenge was how do you define credentials of what has been acquired on by way of competencies, because we are not looking at a student in an educational institution acquiring certificates or credentials of learning on this portal. So we are looking at the application and its assessment of whatever has been learned. Does it enhance the performance in the space in which one is working? The application part and the assessment part, which would lead to further credential of what is being gained here on the platform, is something of a work in progress where we are still deliberating on. Should we go in for a very traditional conservative method that has always been happening? Or, which I would prefer, is to develop an initiative in which we do something totally out of the box and link the credentials to actually the governance linked performance. What is the outcome these credentials are giving? Therefore, looking at performance that is linked to governance is your application. So we have started it's not been tested fully, but we have a self based assessment for driving these credentials and certifications and credits with university and academic institutions. How do we work on them? I may not be able to share too many details of that because we still don't know how it's going to pan out. But we are looking at out of the box options and alternatives for bringing in a design that is totally new and novel and adapted to who we are looking at as learners here.
That's great. I mean, I think obviously the signal to employers is valuable, but also the clarity on motivation for learners is super helpful. So that's a good foundation. I'm curious what you're learning and what skills that you're developing personally.
Okay, one skill I never had was being a patient listener. I'm learning to be a patient listener, especially when I sit amidst learners seeking their feedback. It's, of course, very difficult to listen to them when they complain about a lot of things on the portal. But I'm learning that behavioral skill. And, of course, learning a lot of courses on the Indian knowledge system. The Indian knowledge system is something that, as an ethos, should be underpinning the whole effort of building a developed India. That's why it's called Viksit Bharat. So, the Indianness of the knowledge, deep knowledge that we have, the cultural context that we have, is something that was always there, probably subconsciously at a deeper level. We are trying to bring it as part of what we call as Karmayogi competency model. So, we developed a competency model based on the Indian way of looking at governance, which actually makes it very easy for us to connect with the public servants as well as the citizens, because it the contextualization comes up with the flavor of the Indianness. So there's a lot of Indian knowledge system part of it that public servants so far were not exposed as much as they should be, whether it is leadership, whether it's team building or communication skills or even economics, financial prudence. All of this we are bringing that in. That is something I'm also learning as part of my learning pathway.
That's great. I mean, obviously, we're all continuing on this journey, and I really thank you for sharing yours. There are some things that certainly resonate. The long-term thinking about a commitment to learning across the country with the mission has been amazing to see. The extension of thinking about frontline workers all through senior leaders and just making sure that that is motivating and personalized and recognized, rewarded, and built into the fabric of how performance evaluation happens is certainly there. And then the tie to the broader impact and ROI and value that you're trying to deliver. All of those things, I think, are blueprints for success. And it's clear that the foundation is there for great things. So thank you very much for joining. I appreciate you sharing more to our listeners about Mission Karmayogi and your approach to scaling learning in such a large and impactful way. And thank you very much for joining us today, Mrs. Chauhan. I really appreciate hearing your remarks.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
And to our listeners, if you're interested in learning more how governments and organizations are building skills at scale, you can explore more resources and programs at Coursera.org. And if you enjoyed this episode of the Coursera podcast, please rate, review, and share. And I appreciate you spending time with us, and thank you for tuning in.